Thanks for joining me for episode 25 of the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. This is the second episode of season 2, and I'll be joined by Tech with Heart author Stacey Roshan to talk about balancing creativity with mandatory curriculum and encouraging students to feel comfortable in our learning environments. We'll chat about Flipgrid, PearDeck, Edpuzzle, pagers, cartwheels, and more.
Hi, I'm Chris Nesi from the House of EdTech Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network. Just like the show you're listening to right now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast with Jake Miller.
Hello, duct tapers. Welcome in. Thank you for being here. I am so grateful that you're joining me once again today. And if you're new to the show, thanks for trying it out. I hope that I won't scare you away and that you'll stick around for more. I am honored to have Stacey Roshan on the show today. I've followed her on Twitter for quite some time and love the work that she does. And I think that she is a perfect tone setter for the new season of the show. Before we dig into that, though, a reminder that this episode is the first of our new format. This episode launches on August 21st, 2019, and will be followed on August 28th, 2019, 1 week later, by the first ever #EduDuctTape Twitter chat. We'll discuss the same questions in the Twitter chat that Stacey and I discuss in this episode, so I hope you'll join us. It'll be Wednesday, August 28th at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. In the show notes, there's a link to the Google Calendar so that you'll know when the Twitter chats are. And for those of you not in the Eastern USA, that calendar should open up for you in your default time zone so that you can see how it matches up on your calendar. I am guessing that some of you out there have actually never participated in a Twitter chat, and if that's the case, it's relatively simple. You just hop on Twitter, you search for the hashtag you're looking to, which in this case is #EduDuctTape, and at the time that it begins, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you should see a tweet coming from my account with that hashtag that introduces everybody and welcomes everybody in. And the questions are always started with Q1, Q2, Q3, or Q4, and then you respond with A1, A2, A3, or A4, depending on what question you're responding to. So when you're responding to question 1, my tweet will start off with Q1, and your response will start off with A1. And the only thing that matters is that they end with the hashtag #EduDuctTape. That way, as all of us that are in the chat are looking for the tweets, we see them all in the same feed. Now, I'm going to link into the show notes a couple different posts from out there on the internet for different tips for how to participate in Twitter chats. I find that there are a whole lot of strategies people use, and you really have to find what works best for you. I personally use either TweetDeck or Hootsuite. I just switch back and forth between the two of them. And the thing that I like that I could do about them is I could have the chat in two different columns of my view on those screens. You'll have to check them out to see what I mean. And I could see hashtag #EduDuctTape in this case in the first column and in the second column. And in one of them, I keep it all the way at the top. So I'm seeing what's most recent. And the other one, I'm kind of working my way up through it. So I'm making sure I'm not missing anything. That's what works for me. It might not be what works for best for you. You might want to stay all the way at the top, or you might want to work your way up through the chat as it happens, or as you're able to read it, and that's just fine too. I'll put in some blog posts you can look at, or you could just kind of wing it and see how it goes. That is fine too, because you're trying something new. And as you know from this podcast, I certainly praise teachers, educators, people, students, anyone for trying out new things, especially when they believe there might be some exciting growth and learning on the other end of those attempts at new things. Now, before I get ahead of myself talking about these Twitter chats, I know that some of you may be thinking,
Jake, I can't do the Twitter chat next week, so maybe I should just stop listening to this podcast episode.
No, Grandma who owned Tweety Bird, please don't stop listening. Or you might encourage a friend to join the chat and they might tell you, I haven't heard the episode, so I won't participate in the chat. Well, John Malkovich or whoever you are, let me calm down both of those fears. The fear of not not listening to the podcast because you're not going to do the Twitter chat, or not doing the Twitter chat because you're not able to listen to the podcast. Let me calm down both of those issues. The episode and the chat are not dependent on one another. You can learn from and enjoy the podcast without doing the Twitter chat. If Twitter chats are not your bag, or if 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every other Wednesday doesn't work for you, it's okay. You can also participate in the Twitter chat and answer the questions without hearing the episode. If you're behind on podcasts and on all of your commutes in your car, you have kids with you, and you just don't have a lot of opportunities to listen to podcasts, and you tend to listen to them a couple weeks or months late, you can still participate in the Twitter chat. They are not dependent on one another. How will you get the most out of the experience? By doing both, of course. That'll give you the most benefit is if you do both things. But that doesn't mean that you must do both. You can 100% listen without chatting. If you're like, Jake, I've enjoyed you as a podcast in my ears, but I don't want your show as a Twitter chat. Okay, I'm mildly offended, but it's okay. And you could totally chat without listening. First of all, how are you chatting without listening if you're listening right now? But if you're in a situation where you haven't listened to the previous week's episode yet, you could still chat. Again, one does not depend on the other. I hope you'll do both, but I understand that it won't be possible for everyone, so it's okay if you do one or the other. Anyhow, I am so pumped about the chat that I feel like I could spend a whole podcast just talking about the chat. I hope that you'll all join me for it, but at this point, I should probably move on with the rest of this episode. As I mentioned, we've got Stacey, Roshan coming up today, and then one of my favorite parts of the show, the part where we hear from a bunch of wonderful duct tapers. Quack, 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 quack. I'll be sharing an Apple Podcast review, or maybe two, some of my favorite hashtag EDU duct tape tweets from the last week, and an entry from the educational duct tape Flipgrid page. So that's 3 ways that you can get your voice or your words on the show. Hook me up with a review on Apple Podcasts, tweet about the show with the hashtag EDU duct tape, bonus points if it's fun or funny, or respond to one of the prompts on the grid at flipgrid.com/EDU duct tape, which you can also find by clicking the appropriate link on eduducttape.com. Before I bring out the old soapbox, let's talk about some upcoming events. In October, I'll be at Tecumseh Local Schools and Twinsburg Schools in Ohio, the Quincy Conference in Illinois, and the TCCA Summit in Texas. Those are all October events. In November, I'm honored to be the keynote at Michigan's MiGoogle Conference, a mini-keynote at the Ideastream Technology and Learning Conference in Cleveland, and a speaker at the Teach Better Conference in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. It's looking like I'll be part of the KySTE, I'm not sure, spring conference in March. I should probably figure out how to pronounce it before I actually attend it and present at it. Here's hoping that I get to add a few more events to this list, and I'll learn how to pronounce all of them, I promise. As I told you in the past episode, I've taken this school year off to focus on a variety of ventures, one of which is speaking. So hit me up if you know of an event that needs a speaker. He might be weird, he might be goofy, he might be taller than he sounds like on a podcast, but I promise I will do my best for you. I guess that's all I can give you. Okay, what about some web-related events? Since maybe you're not comfortable with how tall I actually am in person, maybe you prefer the web version of Jake. I'll be doing a little thing on the Ohio Google Educator Group's monthly Google Hangout on August 29th. That's about a week away from today. You can also hear me on a recent episode of Kim Matina's The SuiteTalk podcast, which you can listen to in most podcatchers or view on her YouTube channel. As always, the link to that appearance is in the show notes. I'll also have the link to the details about that Google Educator Group Hangout, and in case you want to participate. It's run by Eric Kurtz along with Stephanie Howell and a bunch of other awesome educators from Ohio, and it really is the most resource dense. Is dense a good? I think dense is a good thing in this situation. The resource packed way that you could possibly get information about Google. I just think it's such a fantastic thing. I normally listen to the recordings afterwards, but in this part, I'll have to be live because I'll have to be part of it this time. But again, the link to both of those will be in the show notes. Speaking of the show notes, have you ever looked at the show notes for this podcast? I tried to get all of the info and all of the links into those show notes. I do hope that you're checking them out, and I do hope they're beneficial for you because I do work hard to try to get all of the information that I can in there for you. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Let me just grab my soapbox from over here. Yeah. There we go. It's perfect. Climb up on there. The problem with chutes and ladders with 5-year-olds is, well, it's not just ladders, and 5-year-olds aren't the best at handling things like, chutes. And I don't want to say that teachers are like 5-year-olds. Oh, man, I don't want to say that. But with my passion being supporting teachers in the integration of technology and doing the best things we can for students, I tend to see things from the lens of at JakeMillerTech, EDU Twitter guy, EDU GIF maker, educational duct tape podcast host, blogger, speaker, consultant, etc., not just Jake Miller regular guy. And so things relate back to teaching stuff for me all the time. I'm sure many of you can relate to that. And anyhow, a few days ago, my 5-year-old Beckett suggested that we play Chutes and Ladders. And I, of course, said, yes, because I have a rule of sorts for myself as a dad that anytime any of my kids ask me to play anything, read anything, or heck, do just about anything, I'm almost certainly going to say yes. Anyhow, I was nervous when he asked me this because, again, the problem with Chutes and Ladders is, yes, there are ladders, but there are also chutes. And when you're playing with your 5-year-old and the 5-year-old gets a chute, it's like I don't know, maybe it's like Armageddon for them. Almost certainly Temper Tantrum City. Hold on. For those of you who aren't familiar with Chutes and Ladders, is there anybody out there not familiar with the board game Chutes and Ladders? But just in case, I guess I should explain. It's a board game where you move across the board by moving squares based on spinning a spinner. So your character jumps forward squares based on whatever number you spin on the spinner. In our game, our Chutes and Ladders is superhero Chutes and Ladders. So you're a superhero moving forward on a superhero-themed board based on whatever you spin on that spinner. Now, some of those squares are just squares, but others are at the bottom of a ladder that you get to climb up, which is wonderful, while others are at the top of a chute or slide, better known as, that you have to slide down, and that's no fun. Even though slides are fun, you end up going further down the game, which is not good. So you get used to the ups and downs, so to speak, of the game, and they're magnified with a 5-year-old. The chutes are clearly the hardest part for them because they worry about what's happening now. Right now, I am going further down the game. I am falling behind everyone else. We, as the adults, know from a long view that we're all going to get some chutes and we're all going to get some ladders, and it all kind of evens out in the end, and no chute or ladder are really that catastrophic in the grand scheme of the whole game. And so this reminds me of technology integration. Some activities are ladders and some are chutes. Some tech tools are ladders and some are chutes. And we often don't know which is which until we try them out. Because what might be a ladder for me may be a chute for you. After all, we're different people with different teaching styles and different students. So one thing that I find that we have to do as technology leaders or as just regular old teachers who are trying to integrate technology is to think about what our goals are and to think about them from the E plus R equals O perspective that I've talked about before, which is we know what the event is, we know what the outcome we want is, so we choose our response to the event that gives us the best chance at getting the outcome we want. All we can control is our response. How do we get that event? And how do we respond to get to the outcome we want? Well, in my situation, when I'm playing Chutes and Ladders with my 5-year-old, my goal is that by the end of playing Chutes and Ladders with my 5-year-old, number one, we haven't experienced any temper tantrums, but number two, that my 5-year-old has experienced successes and fallbacks and responded appropriately to them, that he was a good sport when it was going well, and it was a good sport when it was going poorly. I don't want to shelter him from things going wrong, and I don't also want to, make him feel like he can't celebrate when things go well. I want him to handle both of them. So my response is to model appropriate reactions. And this is true in the classroom too. If you're a technology leader in your building, whether it be as an official position or just something you've kind of taken upon yourself, the best thing you could do is model appropriate interactions with technology. Model how to handle those proverbial chutes, as well as how to handle those proverbial ladders. So in this situation, I was playing Chutes and Ladders, superhero Chutes and Ladders, with my 5-year-old Beckett, as well as my 10-year-old Cohen, who joined in when he saw how much fun we were having and Cohen unknowingly helped me model appropriate behavior during this game. And the first and most important thing is to understand how to handle these fallbacks. And this is huge in the teaching career. We think there's so much pressure on us in every lesson. It's got to be perfect. We can't lose this lesson. The kids have to learn this today. I can't fall a day behind my pacing guide. And I feel horrible for teachers that they have to deal with that stress, but that is the case. And so we have to model to them how to handle taking those risks. You might land on a chute, but you might also land on a ladder. So you can't land on either if you don't move forward. So move forward in case it's a ladder. And hey, if it's a chute, this is how you act. Oh, no! It's me. 1, 2. Whoa!
Was that fun?
Oh, that was a fun slide. So the kids didn't know I was recording during that. I just thought, this is gold right here. I'm going to start recording this as we play. And there's two things that happen in that clip that I absolutely love. Number one, obviously, there's me modeling myself landing on a chute and how I react. I react with a smile and a little bit of a laugh. I'm disappointed and frustrated, but I'm still trying to have fun. Now, that's not how we react in the classroom when a lesson goes poorly, certainly. And that's not what we would model. So this is a little bit of a loose metaphor here because we wouldn't model it in the same exact way we model a chute in a game of chutes and ladders because it is bigger scale. It is higher stakes. So certainly our reaction is going to be different, but still it helps for these educators for us to model how these things feel. And it also works with our students too. When we try risks in the classroom, just in front of our students, we're modeling to them when things don't go well. We're modeling how we handle it. Just like I was modeling to my 5-year-old how I handled falling down that chute. And my 10-year-old, without even knowing it, Cohen jumped in and asked me that question. Oh, was that chute or that slide or whatever he called it, was it fun? And he was just jokingly asking me this, but what a great model, what a great mentor to his younger brother, showing him how to kind of giggle about the things that happen in these different games. Here's another one.
I'm on 82.
Starts with
82.
82, great. I'm on 26.
I'm on 86.
Wah, wah, wah. So you can hear there we were talking about what place on the board we were at. We were actually just practicing our number skills, but you could see that I was far behind both of my sons in the game, and you could see how I was modeling the attitude there. I was disappointed and dejected, but I wasn't crying and storming off and throwing the game and leaving the room. I was trying to model how I handled it. And then the next thing that happened was my early adopter, my 10-year-old, started also modeling appropriate behavior.
One.
Going, what number are you on?
I'm on 24.
I'm on 83.
So as you can hear in that clip there, Cohen ended up going down a chute, and as the appropriate 10-year-old that he is, he didn't throw a fit when it happened. He barely even made a noise. Beckett and I, the 5-year-old, laughed playfully when it happened. And when we asked Cohen what number he was on, he admittedly told us that he was on whatever it was, 24, while Beckett was way ahead in the 80s. And Cohen wasn't, negatively impacted by it. Listen in this clip when Beckett and I both playfully, but see how Beckett is following the way I'm modeling the appropriate way to react to someone else's problem in a game of luck like this, how we both react to it.
3. 1, 2.
Oh, bummer.
Bumbled.
Now, I don't know where the saying bum bird came from in this situation, but what's important here is that he's seeing two people that he looks up to, his dad and his older brother, model how to handle these setbacks. And so in educational technology integration, we model what happens in setbacks. And in our classrooms, we are modeling to our students what happens in these setbacks and how we react to them. A little bit different from how we'd model and react in chutes and ladders, but the same thing. What's the appropriate reaction for me to have here? Because setbacks aren't bad. They're part of the game, and the same is true when we try new things in our classrooms. So next up, we had to have Beckett experience a setback of his own.
1, 2, 3.
Oh, man.
I'm still going this way, though.
Yep, you're still ahead of us. You're still doing good.
Yes, I am.
And look at that. Not only is the way he counts adorable, a one, a two, a three. It's like the cutest version of the Count from Sesame Street. But listen to his reaction there and look at how he doesn't freak out. He doesn't panic. He looks at things from the lens of what he's learned and what he knows moving forward. Hey, look how far ahead I am on the board. So same thing in our classrooms. What can our teachers learn from the setbacks? Or what can you learn from the setbacks? Or what can your students learn from the setbacks? We keep modeling this, and the people watching us kind of take on those things we're modeling.
That's 2. 1 and 2. Woo! Look at me, Cohen.
Good job, bud. That was a good one.
You're gonna get 3.
And just after you went down that purple slide, too. And look at that. Things happen that we get to celebrate, too. But now, when we celebrate them, we also get to model the appropriate way to celebrate and model looking at them from the lens of the whole picture. So I could say to him, look, something went wrong before, but now look at what you've gained. And in the classroom, when we're trying out new things, or when our students are trying out new things, we could say, yeah, it didn't work yesterday when we did it this way, but today we made this little change based on our observations, and look at how great this result is.
1. Yes, I got 1.
Oh, no, here he comes. Whoa.
Please.
Good one, Co. So in that one, Cohen, the 10-year-old, has a great result. He gets a roll that sends him up a ladder, and he catches up with everybody else. And I model, let's celebrate this instead of feeling sad that he's catching up with us. And modeling excitement for other people in the classroom, both as a teacher and as a leader in technology integration, is huge because it shows what we value. If I celebrate in front of the staff that I work with a teacher using PearDeck to keep all kids engaged and do formative assessment in class, then I'm telling the rest of my colleagues, this is what I value. If I celebrate somebody doing sketchnoting, then I'm showing everybody around, I value this. I think this is important. And celebrating others' successes not only makes them feel better and helps them understand that they're doing what we value, but it shows everybody else what's valued. So I guess the big thing that I'm trying to talk about here is that in technology integration, just like in Chutes and Ladders, the best thing that we could do for apprehensive educators, or if we are an apprehensive educator, is understand that we're modeling our reactions to what happens with a growth mindset. We understand that there are failures along the path to growth and that it's okay because the end goal is the growth. It doesn't matter what happens in the intermediary stages because, you know what? There's often a ladder after there's a chute. So sometimes we get that chute and we laugh it off and we're not excited about it, but we go, hey, there's a ladder coming around the bend. And when we're in the classroom, we observe what happened so that we can get ourselves to those ladders because each chute tells us a little bit more about what's happening. It helps us. You know, in teaching, it's not random. It's not luck, just like it is in Chutes and Ladders. There is actual strategy and knowledge that we need. And you have that strategy and knowledge. So you could react from things. You could react from the chutes or the things that you expected to be ladders that weren't quite ladders to make future activities and future integrations and future uses of tech tools be the ladders that take you halfway up the Chutes and Ladders board. But always remember that when those chutes happen, we can learn from them. And my favorite thing that also comes into play here is as we put in new technologies, we can begin to scaffold them. So you think about using something like Flipgrid just to get regular responses. Well, later on, we could use Flipgrid to do all kinds of crazy things like flip hunts and show AR codes all around the room and do whiteboard videos and respond to math problems and all kinds of stuff with Flipgrid. So we keep scaffolding it up. And I did the same thing playing Chutes and Ladders the other day. You see, my 5-year-old is going into kindergarten and he needs to start knowing his numbers above 12. He gets mixed up at 13 and 14 because he thinks they sound the same. So I started asking him to tell me what number he was on.
1, 2, 3.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, guys.
What number are you on?
76.
Good job.
I'm all the way on 17.
Listen to Big Bro modeling how he's not too frustrated about that setback of only being on 17. What a good kiddo. Beckett, what number are you on?
79.
Good job. It's important to notice that I was encouraging repetition of the thing that I was trying to get them to do. Same thing in the classroom. We don't just do one and done activities with these technologies. We keep doing them so we can keep getting better at it, keep observing what can enhance the classroom experience for our students and encourage rich learning. So when something works, we keep going to make it really good practice. But it's important to note the best thing that we could do to get it to that point is good quality modeling of how to do these things in the classroom and how to react when they go well and when they go poorly. And so this is why things like pineapple charts and observe me movements and welcoming other teachers into your classrooms when you try out new things or when you're doing old things that you know are really great that you wish other teachers would be exposed to. That's why welcoming them in could be really powerful for them. 6.
I need a bigger double.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm on 78. I certainly can't ask him to tell me what number he's on every time if I'm not going to do it myself. So I have to model what I consider to be that best practice. The same thing goes for us in our classrooms and our schools and our staff meetings and our professional developments. We've got to model what we think is best practice if we want our learners, quote unquote, which might be educators for some of us, if we want them to take them on as their own practices.
Now I go. Oh, 6.
Yay! Beckett's the winner. Good job, bud.
I would get any, if I got any number, I just do it. Let's go again.
Yep, you did good.
Anyone want to go again?
No, Daddy's going to be done. If you guys want to play, you can.
I'm not going to.
Is there any surprise that I was done after one time through the game? Anybody want to go again? No, Daddy's done. I did my best, you guys. Don't judge me. And so with that, with this long talk about chutes and ladders, which I hope that you enjoyed, I think it's time for us to welcome in our guest.
Today's guest.
Today, our guest is Stacey Roshan. Stacey is a director of innovation and educational technology at Bullis School and author of Tech with Heart, leveraging technology to empower student voice, ease anxiety, and create compassionate classrooms. She also teaches math, and her flipped classroom approach has been featured in media outlets such as USA Today and CNN. Stacey is passionate about bringing innovative tools into the classroom to create a safe learning environment for all students to find their voice and build confidence. You can find Stacey on her blog at techiemusings.com or on Twitter at BuddyXO, and both of those will, of course, be in the show notes. Stacey, welcome in. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you on because you released this book back in the spring. When did it actually come out?
Yeah, in the spring of this year. Yeah.
Yeah, and that came out, and I was like, "Oh, this is an educational duct tape topic right here." It's like you wrote a book from the perspective that I'm always trying to come at on the show here. So tell us a little bit about what the book is about. Like, what's kind of the back of the book kind of statement about what it is.
Thanks. That means a lot to me, by the way. But I guess for me, I wanted to firstly share my story and my evolution, how I've gotten to the place that I have as a teacher. For me, a lot of people know that I started flipping my classroom back in 2010, and now I've gotten to a much different spot in my teaching that started my interest in ed tech as a solution to a problem that I had in my classroom, which was anxiety and just a lot of stress in my AP Calculus class. And I guess why this topic hit so close to home for me and why I wrote the book was it's something that I share in the book that I haven't shared publicly before this, was my own struggles as a student. I was very much that introverted student, that perfectionist who just wanted to please my teachers, my parents, and I had this unhealthy sense of what the perfect student was. And what I was striving for was this unrealistic ideal. And I've tried to, in becoming a teacher, hear from my students, listen to my students, understand what they need, and create this connection with them, all of them, that, I couldn't necessarily have in the class sizes that I was in high school, even though I had the best teachers. And so for me, just sharing the story of how I've seen technology as a solution to actually bringing more compassion into the classroom and allowing me to be that teacher that I wanted to be in the first place, especially when I started teaching AP Calculus, where the curriculum was packed and I just wanted to make sure that I could still hear from my students.
Yeah, and those kids in an AP calculus class are probably very similar to what you were saying. You were like in school, like if they're taking an AP class and they're taking calculus in high school, they clearly are highly motivated, high achieving students, and they're on their road to college. And that's a very stressful time, right?
Yeah, they're putting so much pressure on themselves. And there's just so much pressure out there right now with the college process and all that. It's not healthy. So what can we do in the classroom to help them, rebalance?
Yeah, I love that. So you said, this is what I need to do, is I need to help these kids continue to learn the content, but also, feel loved, feel cared for, feel comfortable, feel less anxious. And I want to hear them. I want them to be comfortable telling me when they have a problem. How can I handle that? And you turn to technology, and that's what the book focuses on, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, we're going to put a link to that book in the show notes, because I bet some people are, as they're listening, they're already on Google searching for it. It is called Tech with Heart, but we'll have a link there in the show notes. I'm really excited about it, because like I said, as soon as you came out with it, I'm like, I have to have Stacey on the show, because that's what we do on Educational Duct Tape.
Yeah.
And when I was thinking about this new season, I said, I want to start the first 2 episodes off and talk about beginning of the school year things. And when I think about beginning of the school year things, when I first started teaching, what I thought about was, how am I going to teach my kids the procedures of the classroom and the rules and the expectations of the classroom? But now I see things differently. I think, how am I going to make my kids feel comfortable? How am I going to get to know them? How am I going to make sure they're not feeling anxious, make sure they're feeling good, make sure they understand that there's empathy, there's compassion in the room. And that's what you're writing about. So I was like, this is episode 1 right here of the season. It's gotta be.
Yeah. Thank you. And just building that trust from day one, because when you've got that, you've got so much going for you, but it's a hard one to build. But if you don't start it from the beginning, it becomes harder and harder.
Yeah, you got to set that tone. And it's hard because, I always feel for the teachers in the classrooms. I'm in a tech coach role, so I'm not in that room in the same, busyness that the teachers are in. They are stressed out already from getting their room set up, from summer wrapping up, from getting their kids back to daycare or getting their kids to school. They're getting all their class lists like the morning the classes start, and they're still trying to get their rooms ready, and they're still trying to figure out their curriculum and get their copies made. And then it's like, build good relationships with these kids, right? And they're like, oh gosh, it's so overwhelming. But that is, that's the most important part of our job. And it's hard to say, you've got all these things, focus on this one, but really, like, what's more important? Those copies or those seating charts, or letting the kids know you care about them. And so this is kind of the perfect thing to start off the year with. But before we get into that really serious, mushy stuff that we're already both like weeping a little bit as we talk about this. We're gonna get a little soft here.
Yeah.
Before we jump into that, let's have some fun. Let's play some games. You ready?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to play a game of which of the following is less torturous. Now, you might know it as another game that I'm not, due to copyright reasons. I've gotten a couple of different phone calls from some board game companies about this. I'm not allowed to say the most common name for this, but I call it which of the following is less torturous. So I have 2 questions for you. You ready?
Yep.
Which of these things do you consider to be less torturous?
Okay, first question. Which of the following would be less torturous? Always having to enter a room by announcing your last name. So you got to walk through the door and yell, Roshan! Or always having to exit a room by doing cartwheels.
Oh, that's funny. If I wasn't wearing a dress, then I'm totally game for leaving a room doing cartwheels. So I guess
You're going with that one?
I would rather do that one.
You'll just have to be like my daughter. My daughter is 8. She just turned 8 a couple weeks ago, and she always, when she wears a dress, she has to wear shorts underneath them, because we're always like, sweetie, you can't, you need to control your situation here, so we have to put shorts underneath her. So that's what you'd have to do. Just always wear shorts, and then just go ahead and do your cartwheels, do your little heart's content.
Yeah, that sounds like fun.
I imagine like next year at ISTE, I see you present, you walk off the stage, and you're like, all right, bye everybody, and you cartwheel out of the room.
If we see each other at ISTE next year, I will do a cartwheel.
Oh, great. I can't do a cartwheel. So as long as I will announce my last name. I was that kid. Yeah, I am all legs and arms and gangly, and there's no cartwheeling happening with my body. I would most likely injure myself if I tried to do a cartwheel. So I'll just be like, Miller.
Yeah.
as I walk in. And you'll be like, great, time for my cartwheel.
Yeah, I was never all legs, so.
Okay. Okay, so next, which of the following would be less torturous is a little bit tech as we start to get into the educational duct tape stuff. Which of the following would be less torturous? Trading your phone for a pager. Remember the days of pagers?
Yeah.
Or trading in your laptop for a desktop. So you can never have a cell phone again, a mobile phone, but you have a pager. Or you can never have a laptop again, but you would have a desktop computer.
Why is this harder than I feel like it should be?
I know what my answer is, but I'm waiting on you.
I mean, I don't know how I would live without a cell phone just to have it. But honestly, I use my laptop way more than I use my cell phone for things.
Yeah.
So not being able to pick up a laptop and go, like, I love just going to a coffee shop, or I don't like sitting in one place. Maybe that's why I chose the cartwheel. And so this one's so tough for me. I'm not sure. Except, I mean, for practicality standpoint, I can't live without a cell phone. So
right. Okay. I think I would keep the cell phone. I think that's what I'd have to go with, because I could do most of the tasks from the laptop on the phone. I wouldn't like it as much.
Yeah.
But gosh, did you have a pager?
No.
See, I had a pager, so you don't understand what this is like. People would, normally it was like you'd get somebody's phone number and you'd have to call them back. But then everybody started using like different codes on them and stuff like that.
Oh.
And the codes would mean things, and you'd have to like know what these codes meant, like the series of numbers and letters. And yeah, I can't go back to the pager days. This shows our age, that I'm old enough to have had a pager as a college student, and you're like, what's a pager?
I bet we're not that different in age, but
we'll compare birth certificates also while we're talking about our spreadsheets later.
Sounds great.
Okay, so now that we've talked about a little bit of technology, let's dive into the actual educational technology. So I'm guessing that having some new listeners as the season starts here, I need to kind of clear the air on what educational duct tape is, so those newbies understand. So educational duct tape is my goofy metaphor that says that educational technology is at its best when it's being used to address a need or solve a problem or meet a goal, rather than when it's being used as the goal itself. Just like duct tape. Like duct tape is at its best to solve a problem, but we never set forth like, I'm going to use some duct tape today. So that's what educational duct tape is. So you and I are going to talk about a couple of questions, a couple of goals in the classroom, and how we might use technology to address them. Does that sound good?
Fabulous.
Okay, great. So first I get to go. So my question is, and I'm asking this question intentionally because you were a high school math teacher, not just high school math, but AP calculus. And that's one of those super serious curriculums, right? You got to get them ready for the AP test. You got to get all the information in by the end of the year so they can take Calc 2, or so they're ready for college classes, whatever it might be. So how can you balance that mandatory curriculum that comes with it with also having creativity when the admin and the district expect teachers stay on track without delays? So when you've got this mandatory curriculum you need to finish in time, how do you balance that with being creative? And I also should say, by the way, this was a listener-generated question when I asked for some back-to-school questions, and I said, that's a perfect one to ask Stacey. So how do you balance mandatory curriculum and creativity?
Yeah. So I'm going to lean into that creativity a bit in terms of creativity from the teacher standpoint, and also in terms of ed tech integration.
Okay.
And I mean, to me, they're not really separate things. And yeah, let's talk about my AP calculus class, because that is a packed curriculum, and I completely get it. And I will say that going back to, the philosophy of like technology as a solution here, what was your problem? I'll start with my problem. Back in 2010, I had these kids. I was lecturing in the classroom. I felt like we were on this treadmill going at full speed for 40 minutes. And then I had 10 minutes, 5 minutes, however long my class period was, to answer all these questions that kids had before they had to go home and do their homework. And it didn't feel good. So I really looked to technology as a solution, and I had to creatively rethink what I was doing. And so that was when I started flipping my classroom, and then thinking about why I was doing that. Where did kids need me the most? But I had to also explain to them, shift their mindset a bit, that when they're watching this video, it's going to be a little bit scary the first time. You're watching an AP Calculus video and I haven't talked to you about that material yet in class, but it's okay. It's going to be difficult, but we are going to deconstruct that in class. And by the time you come to class, you will have had hours to process and let that marinate, whether you're thinking about it or not. You're thinking about it in your head, and we're going to talk about that in class, and we're going to have a rich conversation about that in class instead of the lecture where it was really just you asking me clarifying questions because you didn't have enough time to process that material yet to ask really good questions yet.
Yeah. So now when you say flipped classroom, are you talking like, kind of the textbook definition where the lessons were recorded and the kids were watching them on their own, and then in class was their chance to practice? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah. So really when I started flipping my class, it was just, took all the lectures that I was doing in front of that class in that year, 2009 to 2010, that didn't feel great. And I put them all on video for the 2010, 2011 school year. I only did one chapter at the beginning because I was going to just flip that beginning unit. And then I told the kids, whenever you guys don't like it, we'll go back. And they liked it and they kept liking it and they kept liking it. So I had to make a whole year's worth of videos that year. But it was great that I was doing it as I was hearing the feedback from the kids so I could really customize it to what they needed. And I think that's been a big key to the success that I've had. But year after year, I just take one thing and very much look in the lens of like, what's a problem spot in my classroom and how can I fix that? And so then I want to talk a little bit about like the student creativity or like helping the students rethink things. I think that something that I've tried to do in the more recent years is really get at this process over product. So how you're thinking about the question is many times more important than that final answer that you get. And many times in math class, kids think so black and white that I like math class or I hate math class because there's a right and a wrong answer. But it's really about how did you get there and how were you thinking through that answer? And so how do I hear that from kids? Well, one solution has been my flipped classroom because I actually hear them working on problems in class. They work in groups and I'm walking around the classroom for most of the period, listening to what they're saying and joining in on their discussions instead of me driving that conversation, but also just using I personally use Flipgrid. There's other ways you could do it. I find Flipgrid the easiest way to do this, allowing students to respond in a Flipgrid and write out a math solution so that they're talking through the process of how they got there. And I do some of them as private, just between me and the student, and some of them as them teaching their classmates how to solve that problem. But then again, it comes back to if I'm adding this assignment, which takes them longer, I have to take away some problems from the number of questions I was assigning. So I think it's a juggling act at all times about really carefully thinking through what you're asking, why you're asking it, and making sure that when we integrate technology, it's not an add-on and that, we're rethinking our lesson design.
Right. Because there is such a thing as too much, right? We get so excited about this technology, but you can overdo it. That's a possibility out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how stoked are you, by the way, for the new upgrades to Flipgrid? Because they are perfect for that.
Oh my God. I have no words. Yes.
Yeah. So for listeners that aren't familiar with it, Flipgrid launched, some updates on August 1st. They announced them back at ISTE, but it became live on August 1st. And of course, Flipgrid is still completely free for everybody, but they announced all kinds of different upgrades to their system. And the big one for you is that now there's whiteboard mode with live inking in your Flipgrid videos. So a kid can be talking and it could be showing their face. They could pause it while they're recording, compose their thoughts, and then switch to whiteboard mode where they're writing out how they did a problem. Like how huge is that in that kind of situation?
Yeah. And I'm so excited about it, particularly because I am blessed to have this class set of Wacom tablets. So my students all bring laptops to class, but then I have this class set of the Wacom tablets so they can actually ink up their slides in Flipgrid and we can actually make screencasts, which is so exciting. But even before that, it's just like creatively think about what you have and what you can use. Every kid had a cell phone in my classroom. So we were literally holding a cell phone over a piece of paper and they were pointing or they were writing on a piece of paper and we were just using the camera on the phone. It was about hearing the kids talk, hearing them verbalize their math process. Why are you doing this? Talk me through it. And then getting them to really develop some of those higher order critical thinking skills by coaching them through that process.
Yeah. So a couple questions here. The Wacom tablets, which is Wacom for people who haven't heard of that brand before, they don't have a screen on them, right? They're just like a writing pad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they plug in via USB into the computer, and then you're seeing the writing happen up on the screen, but you're doing it on the pad. And so it lets kids write like they write instead of trying to drag a mouse around the screen. So this is a really nice thing for schools that have Chromebooks that are more than a year old or whatever kind of devices, and they don't have touchscreen, and you can actually do the writing that way instead of having to use your mouse cursor. Will you, when we're all done, give me a link to those, and I'll put that link in the show notes so everybody can see which ones you have?
Yes, absolutely.
That's awesome. So a couple questions or a couple things I liked about what you said there. One is that we're talking about creativity here, and you haven't talked about like a project or a poster or coloring or skits or anything like that yet, because I think we have a misconception of what creativity really is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you're giving your kids, you're doing what you still have to do, which is that mandatory curriculum, but you're letting your students create in the process. They might just be creating like a video of how they talk through something, but that is them as creators, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's it. And also giving them some options on, how is their voice going to shine, and giving them some options for that. Because some students, it's in the classroom when they raise their hand, that's when their voice is going to shine. But some of them really, when they get on that Flipgrid and they're able to talk out what they're thinking, and they can kind of script it and formulate a response ahead of time, I hear a whole new side that I never would have heard in the classroom. So I think it's important, to give them those various options. So just like creativity soars when you give them, the right assignment, differentiating those assignments.
Yeah. Well, and that's, so some people are probably listening and going, well, Jake, that's not creativity. Like recording your answer to a math problem is not creativity. But in reality, what it is it's building their ability to be more creative. It is creative, but it's also building their ability to be creative in more wide open, open-ended ways, because they're developing their voice. They're developing their experience with explaining things to people. They're finding like if they record a response and you go like, I couldn't really understand what you were saying here, then they're starting to understand maybe the flaws in the way they describe things to people. And so then when they go to do something that's just full free range creativity, they've got a background of like, oh, I could use these skills I developed when I was taking my AP Calc class or whatever class it was, as to how to describe things and how to be creative.
Yeah,
does that make
absolutely.
sense?
And then also just seeing the different ways to solve a problem, that there's not one way. I might be repeatedly sharing one way, or I might be explaining it one way on the board, but as kids post to these grids and they watch each other's, they see that there's all these different ways to think through a problem. And sometimes they really want to start getting creative and think of a different way or a more efficient way. And we actually do that. Sometimes we take problems, we watch somebody else's, and then we say, hey, could you have solved this a different way? Is it better? Is it worth compare?
Right. And tools like Flipgrid are so fantastic for that, because everybody could post their own response to a grid and then be able to see what each other did.
Absolutely.
And how they did it different. Or if you don't want the whole class to see everybody's responses, you leave the grid as moderation turned on. And then you as the teacher say, hey, this is a really great strategy. I'm going to share this one with the class. Hey, this is a really great strategy. I'm going to share this one with the class. And then just show them certain videos.
Yeah. And you hit something that's so important to me too, is I love that you brought up that moderation, because I think it does take you building this culture in your classroom of sharing and getting kids comfortable to share their response publicly. It can be intimidating at the beginning. So, I do try and start with some moderated posts where the video is just between me and the student. I can start giving them feedback. They can start warming up to that idea and feel comfortable with that. And then we do some of the more public posts. I think that's important too, to understand where your students are at and to get them to a good spot. Yeah.
A word that we don't hear mentioned much in education, at least I don't, that I remember a lot from my college years when I was, a pre-service teacher, was scaffolding. And that's what you're talking about here, like scaffold in these uses of Flipgrid or of whatever kind of creativity you're doing. So don't make the kid who's brand new to the room, doesn't know any of their classmates, doesn't know their teacher, is feeling overwhelmed. Don't make them create something on day one that they're displaying to all kids in the room and their new teacher, like maybe scaffold it in, right?
Absolutely.
And that gives you the chance as the teacher to give them some feedback before it goes live to everybody else.
Yep.
and then they can keep honing in on the right process to do it as the school year goes on. So by doing it thoughtfully and scaffolding it at the beginning of the year, that's a great way to do it.
Yeah.
And then when you get to that situation, like we talked about, like how maybe doing a video response maybe isn't the most creative thing, but maybe later in the year you do something that really is a very creative project. Now you've built these kids that know that their voice is appreciated in the class. They know how to interact on video. They feel comfortable recording themselves. And now they're just taking another step with that rather than taking all of these steps at once. Being creative and recording video and all these things are just adding in another step of creativity.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so one kind of my response here, like if somebody asked me this question, I probably would have gone to Flipgrid first as a way to get kids creating and communicating things, especially in a class like AP Calculus, where there's not a lot of opportunities for like that true creativity where we picture colored pencils and glue and stuff like that out. Like there's just things that are realistic and there's things that aren't. But one thing that jumps off the page here to me is having the students create resources that their classmates then use to develop mastery in a concept. So you're saying on Flipgrid, they're recording these videos about how to do a problem. What if then we take the best of those videos and we start to create like an ebook in Book Creator, or maybe just a mixtape in Flipgrid that talks about how to do something, so then all the students can go back and look at that. And as a group, they're kind of curating their own ebook, their own textbook for the class, so that they can all go back and study from it. Because, you've got that big AP test at the end of the year, right? Yeah. So and that is creativity right there, is knowing what your viewer needs. So if they're thinking, what are the things we need to explain and show to teach our classmates how to do this, then they're being creators right there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I really see it as, first of all, now they are in charge of test review because they post to these series of questions to this grid. And then that's something that, I make sure I work with them. I make sure that the answers are good on that. We have several days to make sure that those are all worked out. And then students study from that. So they do that. They're in charge of their test review. They have to answer the questions and then they go up to the grid for them to study from. And then we do about 3 times a year where kids, it's kind of like a portfolio of some sort, them documenting their work, and they go back to the videos and they have to pick 2 videos that they had created before and a video or 2 videos, depending on what time of the year, that their classmate had responded to. And so they're looking back through old material and then they're taking it and they're putting it and now they have to put a spin on it. How did you solve that problem before? Would you solve it the same way now with the new information that you have? Would you solve it differently? Or if you're watching a classmate's, what critical feedback would you give them? And I definitely coach them in being able to give that critical feedback, because that's a really, really difficult task, is being able to watch somebody else's and know whether, was it solved in the best way? Was it not? Like, it's very easy to just say, oh yeah, I think they did a great job. What does it mean to actually give critical feedback? So that's something that we work on. But I think, it's so important that kids look back at prior work. And I think that's a power of digitizing some of this stuff. It's so easy for kids to look back on prior work, but they're not going to just randomly look back at their old Flipgrid videos just because they feel like it. How are we building it into what we're doing? How are we integrating it in? And how are we asking them, what did you do? How have you grown? And how can you connect that material? There's so much power in them being able to connect the new with the old. Like, we know that from the science of learning, right? And the brain and all of that. So how are we doing that with some of these tools? It's so easy to access the prior work. So, yeah.
Yeah. And this is great, because what you're really kind of talking about are some things that really fit in with design thinking, right? Because you're thinking about, what are things that show my understanding of this, or what are things where I prove that I could be creative, or what are things that are going to benefit my classmates on the chapter review, the review guide you were talking about. Right. And thinking about the word creativity, like, the root is create. Like they're just making something. It implies artistic to us when we hear it, but it really just means creating. Like I looked up the definition while we were talking, and one of the definitions, the one on Wikipedia, says creativity is a phenomenon whereby something new and somehow valuable is formed. So it doesn't mean that it involves paint or involves a skit. It just means that they're creating something of value, right? And so by doing these things with this, you're creating the value. And I think it looks different in every class. If you're a third grade language arts teacher, you're certainly going to be able to do things in your class that involve more like what we could call like textbook creativity, the things we think of as being creative. But when you're in a class where it doesn't lend itself to those projects, just think about how can your students be creators and how can we do that within the box of our mandatory curriculum? Because unfortunately or fortunately, we still have that mandatory curriculum. So that's what you're saying is I looked at what I needed to achieve and I looked at what my students needed and I found a way for them to be creators in that box.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
And if teachers across their whole schooling are doing things like that, then they're getting such a well-rounded background in creativity, even though it looks different in math class from how it looks in Spanish class or whatever it might be. They're doing different things that are all them as creators.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
But
I'm a little bit of a nerd, aren't I?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I could just talk to you for a couple hours right now, but I think it also really does require that rethink of assignments that you were giving. And just that's something that I really try and be mindful of. And in my role of working with other teachers, like we can't just add these things on. It is a balance of give and take. So if we are going to add some of these assignments, which do take more time for the students to do and do take us more time to grade and give good feedback on, what are you taking away? And I think you have to really think through that. And I feel like if I've found a way to take away in my AP Calculus classroom and for their scores to be just as high, if not higher than they were, that a lot of teachers can do the same.
Right. Well, and if you look at the original question that somebody submitted on the Google form that I put out there on Twitter, the basic question was, how can we balance mandatory curriculum with creativity? And I think the thing that we have to change there is not how can we balance mandatory curriculum with creativity, but how can we combine mandatory curriculum with creativity? Because that's really what you're saying is I'm still doing the mandatory curriculum. I'm not adding something in.
Right.
I am using the creativity inside of my existing thing. I'm not like doing a worksheet on Monday and then doing something creative on Tuesday and then having 2 days for what could have been one. I'm replacing the worksheet with something creative that also reaches that same end goal, right?
Yes, exactly.
And that's challenging. And you said something, I don't even know if it was in the question or earlier on, but you said something about you would focus on one problem at a time, maybe even one a year. And you started off thinking, I'm just going to do this for chapter 1 and I'm going to see how it goes, right? So we don't need to reinvent every single lesson to be more creative.
Yeah.
We do it in bite-sized chunks as much as we can.
Yep.
But, we got to be realistic, like Monday might be super creative and Tuesday we didn't have time to make creative, but next year we'll hit that lesson better, right?
Yeah. I mean, in Tech with Heart, I literally have this timeline of year 1. This is how I flip my class. Year 2, year 3, year 4, and I go all the way up to year 8 because that was when I had finished writing what I was writing. And every year I pick one goal. So I think that very often you look at Twitter or you look at all these people's blogs and you're like, oh my God, I want my flipped classroom should look like that, or whatever you're trying to emulate, or trying to recreate in your classroom. That didn't happen in a year.
Right.
And so it just, each year I looked at my classroom, I looked at my student needs, and I looked at myself too, and what I was passionate about and what I wanted to, be able to share more with my students and for them to get to know me better and to, highlight my strengths as a teacher too. I think it's critical that we look to other people to help us out. I'm always going to Twitter to look for worksheets. My favorite thing is not creating spectacular worksheets, but some people out there do. And I take from them and I remix it to my needs. And then I put out as much content as I can put out there for other people. Right. So, if they're not into making the videos, many people kind of use my videos, maybe put it in Edpuzzle and put a little spin of their own on that video. So, know what your strengths are, know what you have time for, but what you're going to do it for a reason and do it well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good mindset for a teacher to start the year off with, is that nobody expects you to have the perfect classroom this year, because nobody has the perfect classroom this year. Everybody, all we're suggesting is you continue to make forward movements based on what you see that you and your students need, right? And I love the idea of a timeline that shows that to teachers, like, look, like, is my year 8 classroom amazing? Yes, but this is what it looked like in year 2, and this is what it looked like in year 3. And you could see me continue to move forward, but you can also see me continuing to say, well, that was good, but I'm going to change this now. No, that was good, but I'm going to change this now, right? Yeah. And continue to level up as you go.
Yeah.
I've missed being in front of this microphone, Stacey. I'm going to just talk your ear off. Okay, so before you have to turn off your microphone and tell me to stop talking, I think you have a question too. So go ahead.
All right. So my question is, how can educators leverage technology to create more personal connections and make all students comfortable in the classroom?
So I think that this is a perfect kind of beginning of the year question, because this is something that has to happen throughout the year, that making the students feel comfortable and that creating those connections. But you have to create the environment right off the bat that tells the kids, I care about you. I want to know about you. I want to be here to support you. I want you to feel comfortable talking to me. So I think from the lens of the beginning of the school year, the best thing you could do is anything that fits into your situation that asks your students to communicate with you, right? That shows that you care about their voice. Yeah. That might mean you ask them questions in a Flipgrid. It might mean you have them draw pictures and turn them into you. It might mean you use PearDeck or Nearpod and ask them questions, but anything where the students are finding out, hey, my teacher really cares about me. Like they really are trying to connect with me, because then later in the year, you could start doing those things that really develop those connections. Like that's when the kid's comfortable enough to tell you about how their basketball season is going or something like that. And you can start really connecting with them. Yeah. So I think I don't have one answer here. My answer is make sure you're hearing the students' voices. And so the go-to answer for most people in education right now is, we use Flipgrid for that. And that's a wonderful answer for it. But it doesn't have to be. It could be audio with synth. It could be something with pencil and paper. It could just be conferencing one-on-one with students right off the bat. It could be whatever's realistic that fits the age of your students, your style as an educator, that lets you hear the students. Do you have any specific ways you would do this? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. But I just want to touch on something that you said with letting kids know that you are reading their responses, that you're listening to their responses. So if you're doing those Flipgrids, give them some feedback. You can type the response right back in Flipgrid. You can do a little video response, but I do think that's really important. I know I talk to a lot of ed tech companies who say that their analytics features, which is why districts purchase in the first place, are actually not always very well used. So, and I see it a lot that people will assign ed puzzles and then not be using all the analytics, or just be looking at whether or not the student watched the video. But if you're going to ask short answer questions, how are you using what students have written for those short answer questions, and how are you letting it known to them that you are reading it? I get so many questions about, how do you incentivize kids to do these things? And I don't really, they don't get points based on whether they got it correct or incorrect, but I do give them feedback on what they've done. And I talk to them about those answers. And so they continually give me good answers in there because they know I'm reading it, because I'm talking to them about it. So I think that's really important. And then, you touched on another one of my favorites, which is PearDeck, in terms of asking questions and letting students respond honestly. And also even just for little temperature checks as you're going throughout the class, because when you display that on the projector, it's anonymous. So, the names are not attached. I can see from the teacher dashboard later, or, I can pull it up somewhere that's not on my projector, what student that is attached to, so that I can get to them if I need it. But it gives students the ability to, I think, more honestly respond and tell me what they're needing and how they're actually doing. And it's also instantaneous, immediate feedback for me, so that I can get around to them. I think that's been a game changer in my classroom. I start with a PearDeck as many times as possible. again, something, that we use our Wacom tablets for is kids actually plug in, and in PearDeck, there's the drawing feature so they can draw on any slide. And so I have kids solving problems. So instead of a warm up on a piece of paper where I had to pick up the paper after class and then I really couldn't do anything with it till the next day, now it's immediate, real time. Actually, as students are drawing, I see them drawing. I love that there's no submit key in that tool, that I can see as they're typing what they're typing, as they're drawing what they're drawing, and I can get around to that kid who might be slow to start. Why are they slow to start? Are they still processing it, or do they need me to sit by them and give them some help for the day? And then what I also really like is that it's gotten away from that hand raising. I hated raising my hand in the classroom. I always wanted to participate, but I think so many times it felt like, if I was a teacher in that classroom, I would have thought that I didn't want to participate, but it was just that I didn't have an answer on the spot. I need time to process and think. And in math, still, I need time to process and think. I can do, like AP Calculus, I've been teaching it way too many years in a row right now. And so the problems, many of them I could do in my sleep. I see them so many times over, but when I read the problem, I read it a second time over. Like, that's just the way that I am. And so, for me, using a tool like PearDeck as a warm up, instead of just asking a question on the board and asking kids to raise their hand, now I'm allowing everybody the time and the space to kind of work through those problems. And then we display them on the projector and then we talk about them. And so the kids who are really verbal, the moment that we start talking about on the board, that's the time that their voice is going to shine. But the kids who are not going to be that kid, now I'm able to project their response on the board and we can be talking about their response. Again, it's a way to talk about the students' responses instead of me putting the perfect thing up there on the board. We can talk about the wrong answers. We can talk about the right answers. But most importantly, we can talk about their answers.
Oh, I like that statement there. And I think what's cool about what you're saying here is, even though from the beginning of the year lens, we're thinking like, do an icebreaker activity and things like that. And yes, please do things that make your kids have fun on those first days of school and help you get to know them. But you're also saying when you do content related things, take actions that show your kids that you care about their understanding and their thinking, right? So you're showing them, hey, she wants to know if I understand this problem right now. And if I don't understand this problem, she's coming over to help me, right? And if I don't feel comfortable speaking on a class, she's going to find a way to talk to me that does make me feel comfortable. Yeah. And so it doesn't relate to like finding out which kids are big football fans and which kids like what kinds of music, which are all great things to do. It relates to what kind of you're non-verbally communicating with them while you're going through content. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And I think it's also really important to just provide students with multiple ways of communicating with you. So sometimes, when I give a video for students to watch ahead of time in Edpuzzle, I always make sure that I give a little space for students to type response. And sometimes students just ask questions or let me know what's on their mind in that space, because not all of them are comfortable asking that question in the classroom. Some of them verbalize it better on a Flipgrid, because we're doing the PearDeck as a warm-up in class, they feel comfortable asking a question or responding honestly when I do that temperature check. So just providing those multiple ways to see what's going on with a student, and especially, that student like I didn't want to let on that I needed anything. But if those opportunities, those questions had been asked in a way that I felt really comfortable, asking them without having to raise my hand and ask that question in the classroom, I think it would have been more evident how much pressure I was putting on myself, and perhaps a teacher could have guided me in a different way. And we have more access to these tech tools, which really do empower us to hear our students in multiple ways. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I like that a lot too, because, there are plenty of students who feel completely comfortable coming up to you in class or raising their hand in class, but that's not all of the students, right? And some of the students might not feel comfortable even in the video asking their question. So then if they have as many different platforms as you could realistically put in without overwhelming yourself as the teacher, but giving them different ways to express themselves and to ask for help or things like that, that's an important thing to do.
Yeah. And I feel like we went so full circle there about, making sure if you're asking for giving the space for them to write, that you have the time to read that and respond to that in a way. So yes, that's so important. Don't ask for more than you can read and handle.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with admitting I can't, right now I'm too busy with these other things. I'm not going to be able to read all their responses. So then don't ask the question at that point in time, because if the students start to get the message indirectly that you're not listening to what they're saying, right, then don't ask it. That's a huge risk. They're not going to tell you if they're not seeing evidence that you're actually listening to them. Last little mini question here. What do you do in the first week or two of school that makes your students comfortable with all of those things? So you have these kids come in that are high schoolers, that are high achieving, and have, I don't want to stereotype the other teachers that they have, but they probably haven't had a lot of situations where they're in flipped classrooms and where their teachers are asking them to show their understanding in a variety of different ways. So how do you make them feel comfortable with this early on?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's that ramping up of expectations and, going slow at first. So in the first month, I just keep the assignments simple in terms of the new technology that they have to use so that it doesn't feel overwhelming. So we don't do a ton of these Flipgrids. The Flipgrids that we do are more just them getting comfortable with it, but we don't do a ton of recording to that yet, because I'm still teaching them how we get at this process and how we're thinking through it. So I rely more on, we do the PearDecks in the classroom and then we show the various responses so I can help students understand the multiple ways to do problems, and that I want to hear how you're solving this and I want to hear how you're talking through it. And I help coach them on becoming more verbal in their math thinking. And then, it's not really until we get into the next chapter that we start doing these Flipgrid responses where they're actually creating these little mini videos and in charge of kind of the test review and the quiz review. So just ramping them up to that. And then also just at the beginning of the year in terms of flipped classroom, especially when I'm doing this with my 9th and 10th graders, I'm not teaching Algebra 2 now, but I did. And something that I found that was so important was explaining why I was doing it, what the flipped classroom is, to both parents and to students. And so I actually just made a video about that. And now I always share a video. It's for parents that can't attend back to school night now can see that. And we can all be on the same page, because that building of trust starts not just with the students, but also with the parents, because they're going home. And when they're going home and they're complaining to their parents, many times it's just because they're looking for advice and they don't know what to do and they need some help. And so, for a parent to be able to understand what my flipped classroom is about and why I'm doing it the way that I'm doing it, they can then help their kid, kind of empower them to own their learning in a way that maybe they hadn't been expected to do before. But again, it's this process, and it does start with explaining it well and explaining the why.
Oh, that's huge, because if you're explaining your why, number one, they feel more comfortable with the situation. But number two, they're hearing this message of, hey, my teacher cares, and my teacher's trying to connect, and my teacher's trying to do what's best for me. My teacher's not just trying to fill my head with information and then have me test on it, and whatever score I get is the score I get. They really are trying to help me understand these things. So explaining your why is huge. This is why I do this in class.
Yeah.
And if your answer to that question proves that you care about the kids, then it's a great thing to be telling the kids. If it sounds like, the reason I do this is because that's what the district says to do, or if the reason I do this is because this is how fast I need to teach these things to get through it all in the year, or anything like that, then you probably need to revisit your practices. So thinking about your why and then explaining your why, that's huge.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for all this, Stacey. I could tell, as we talk about this, it's starting to fill in what Tech with Heart is to me too, because I've read the descriptions of your book online, and I the subtitle and everything like that, and I had kind of a picture of it in my head, but now I'm really seeing what you're talking about and how it relates back to teaching in the regular education classroom, maybe at a high school level, maybe at middle school, or maybe at elementary school, and with still having a focus on content. How is it that you're doing all of these things for the students? And it makes me I just want to hang up right now and go read the book. Is that okay if I do that to you right now?
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you were here for this. What a perfect tone setter for this season. Thank you so much for doing this, Stacey.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so thrilled to have had Stacey on the show today. I'm so eager to get my hands on her book, Tech with Heart. I can't wait to dig into it because just the way she's coming at things, I'm just loving it. I hope you guys are going to go out there and follow her and check out her work and, kind of put the things that she's talking about into practice. But now it is time for us to transition from talking to Stacey to talking to some EDU duct tapers out there that wanted to share. So first up, some Apple podcast reviews. First, we're going to share a review from @Allie McCutch, our good friend Allison McCutcheon, who shared a review on Apple Podcasts titled Amazing and Inspiring. Should be mandatory PD. Allie, I don't want to be mandatory PD. Teachers don't like that. I appreciate the compliment, but I'm not sure if I want to be in that situation there where I'm mandatory professional development. But anyhow, let's see what she says in the rest of the review. She says, "This podcast has totally changed my teaching. Jake has inspired me to integrate many new apps and ideas into my 5th grade curriculum. My students have turned into creators instead of remaining as passive consumers. We have used Flipgrid to demonstrate our learning, share our voice, and connect with others outside our classroom. Our writing has dramatically improved with the use of BoomWriter, BookCreator.com, and PeerGrade. We have engaged in over 10 mystery hangouts and have Skyped with experts all over the country. All of this has been possible because of the ideas I get from Jake and his awesome guests. Thank you for making school fun again for me and my kids." Allie, thank you so stinking much. You are an inspiration. The things that you've shared with us in the duct taper community that you've been doing in your classrooms are totally wonderful, and for you to leave this review is just really touching. I really do appreciate it. Let's next look at a review from our friend Anderson Ed Tech, who I hope we'll see on the Duct Tape podcast here in the future at some point in time. His review is titled Informative and Entertaining, and he says, "The #EDU Duct Tape podcast never disappoints. Jake always has inspiring guests with tons of great knowledge to share. Conversations are always insightful, and Jake is never afraid to speak his mind, which is refreshing in a social media and podcast world for educators that tends to gloss over so much. Keep up the solid work." Thank you so much for that, Kyle. Kyle Anderson Ed Tech is Kyle Anderson, a good friend, awesome educator. You can find him on Twitter @Anderson Ed Tech. He's also one of the co-hosts of the Beer EDU podcast, as well as a frequent member of the Sons of Technology podcast. And he's just awesome on Twitter. You should go out and follow him. So Kyle, thank you so much for that review there. I really do appreciate it. Let's now hop over to the Twitter for my favorite #EDU duct tape tweets of the week. We've got 4 to talk about today. 2 of them are from our friend Mike Abrams @AbramsTank95. His first one, after I tweeted about the season premiere and used a GIF of the LL Cool J video, "Mama Said Knock You Out." That was such a great song and such a great video. Like, that's just part of my childhood. And the "Don't Call It a Comeback," that had to be how I started off the season on Twitter there. He said, @JakeMillerTech, "Who knew @JakeMillerTech had such an appreciation for the 90s hip-hop? My fandom meter just continues to rise. Could a potential #EDU duct tape and @Flowcabulary collab mixtape be in the works?" Mike, I gotta tell you, I think that's not in the works. I am not made for writing rap lyrics. I am, however, made for listening to a lot of 90s rap. We should compare collections at some point in time, but you don't want to hear me in a Flowcabulary mixtape. Up next is our friend Deanna Hubble @DJ Hubble, and she says, "Thanks @JakeMillerTech and your #EDU Duct Tape podcast for getting me through my morning workout. Good luck on your goals for this year, and I'll try to stay awake for the bi-weekly Twitter chat. Let's all ask ourselves what courageous thing we will do this year, and let's make a ruckus." I love it, Deanna. I hope you'll make it on for those Twitter chats, but if you fall asleep, I won't be too mad at you, I promise. And yes, I'd love to hear all about your courageous venture this school year and how you plan to make a ruckus. Next up is another one from our friend Mike @AbramsTank95. He after that intro, after he listened to it, tweeted, "Thank you @JakeMillerTech for the season 2 intro for the podcast. Looking forward to the upcoming changes and conversations. Showing my gratitude and keeping it fun as we head into the weekend." And then he showed a picture that was a combination of 2 different pictures, and it took me a couple minutes to figure out what it meant. You're going to have to go check out the tweet and see what Mike was saying to me in this picture. See if you can figure it out before I figured it out in the tweets. You could look and see how long it took between my first response to him and my final response to him when I actually figured out what he was saying in there. I always do link these tweets in the show notes so you can check it out there. And our final tweet of the week is actually a twofer here. First up, at Mrs. Clodor, my friend Molly said, at JakeMillerTech and his EDU duct tape man voice from season 2, episode 1, that is pretty spectacular. And then the LOL face. Yeah, I was having a good time with those voices. And then her good friend, Dan Stitzel at Mr_Stitzel responded and said he likes the Jeopardy contestant voice. Yeah, I think maybe I have a future as a voice actor. I think Dan and Molly might disagree on that one. Next up, the new #EDU duct tape tweeters of the week. We've got our friend from this episode at BuddyXO, at Copperfield Rose, at EmergeYA, at Mrs. G Kim, at Mr. Wetzel_EdTech, and at SOTX Librarian. And finally, our Flipgrid submission from the week is nothing because you guys haven't submitted anything this week. That's really sad. You guys, I'm feeling kind of hurt to end the episode. This is really a downer of a way to end the episode. You know, you guys can make it up with me. You can go on to the Educational Duct Tape Flipgrid and leave some responses. And better yet, you can meet me next week, Wednesday, August 28th, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the first ever #EDU Duct Tape Twitter chat. And I can't wait, guys. I hope you're all there. I will see you next week, not on the podcast, but on Twitter. And then I'll see you the following week in the podcast again. I hope you'll be there for both of them, though. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. Please consider rating and reviewing the show on your favorite podcast app. #EduDuctTape.